My son texted me 11 days before his wedding. The wedding I was paying $82,000 for. "You're welcome to come, Mom, but Ashley's family feels the head table should be immediate family only." Her side: "We saved you a nice spot near the back." I read it 3 times standing in my kitchen in Kannada, with the kettle screaming behind me. Then I typed back 9 words I meant all the way down to my boots. "Then I'll keep the money, and you can keep the table." He called me crying 90 minutes later. But by then it didn't matter, because the second I hit send, I didn't sit down and weep into my tea. I called my lawyer, and Marguerite had already phoned the venue, the caterer, and the planner before my son ever dialed my number. By the time Daniel was sobbing into the phone asking what I'd done, that money was already crawling back into my account, and the grand wedding they'd built without me had quietly, completely fallen apart. Here's how a woman they called just the lunch lady took back $82,000 and her self-respect in one cold November afternoon. My name is Margaret Ellison. Everybody calls me Peg. I'm 66 years old, and I've got a kitchen the size of a hockey rink with 12 people on the line. And 40 years ago, I had a card table and a deep fryer I bought secondhand off a man in Vanier who was going out of business. I started selling soup and sandwiches out of a lunch counter on Montreal Road when Daniel was 3, and his father had decided that being a father was more of a hobby than a job. 1 fryer. 1 coffee urn that leaked. 1 regular. A foreman from the rail yard who liked his eggs hard and his coffee harder, who tipped me a quarter and told his whole crew. I made breakfast for those men at 5 in the morning with my boy asleep in a laundry basket behind the counter, wrapped in my winter coat because the heat didn't reach back there. And I made it good, so the crew told the other crews. 40 years later, Ellison Food Group runs the cafeterias for 3 hospitals, 2 colleges, and the kind of office towers downtown where the people inside have never once wondered who fills the steam trays. I've got 110 employees. I pay for their dental. I've given more single mothers their first real paycheck than I can count, because I remember exactly what it is to stand at a counter at 4 in the morning doing the math on whether you can afford boots before the snow comes. I'm proud of it the way you're only proud of a thing that took everything you had. My hands will tell you the whole story if you let them. They're burned in a dozen places that healed wrong. The right wrist clicks when it's going to rain. There's a scar across 2 knuckles from a slicer in 1987 that I stitched myself with a needle and thread because I couldn't afford to close for the afternoon. I used to tuck my hands under the table at fancy dinners. I don't anymore. They're the most honest thing about me. People look at a woman with hands like mine and they decide they've got the measure of you. Lunch lady, salt of the earth, bless her heart, not someone you'd seat up front. My son's future in-laws decided that about me the first Thanksgiving I met them. My own son, I'm sorry to say, came around to it too. They all forgot the one thing that matters. A woman who built a company out of 1 leaky urn reads a contract very, very carefully before she signs it, and she signs every one of them in her own name. Let me tell you about Daniel. He's my only child. I raised him alone in a 1-bedroom above a hardware store, and I would still walk into the Queensway traffic for him without thinking twice. I need you to know that before I tell you the rest, because the rest is going to make you angry at him, and I don't want you angrier at him than his own mother is. I gave that boy everything, not money at first. There wasn't any money for the longest time. I gave him the other things. I never missed a single one of his hockey games at the Brewer Park rink, not one, even when I came straight off the line, still smelling like fryer oil, and sat in the cold bleachers in my apron because I hadn't had time to change. I put him through Carleton $100 at a time. I told him every morning of his life that he could be anything he wanted, and he became something. Marketing director at a tech firm in the West End. Sharp, polished, good with a room. A little ashamed of where he came from, I think, the way kids get when they climb a long way up. He started telling people his mother was in food service management. Not my mom runs a kitchen. Not my mom started with a fryer on Montreal Road, food service management. I let it go. Pride is a complicated thing in a boy who watched his mother count change at the grocery, till to make sure she had enough, Then he met Ashley Hargrove. The Hargroves are what passes for old money in this town. 3 generations of the same name on the same brass plaques. A law firm, a seat on a couple of boards, a cottage up in the Gatineaus that's been in the family since the 50s and is the only thing they ever talk about. Vivian Hargrove, the mother, has a way of looking at you that takes about 4 seconds and somehow involves your shoes, your purse, and the exact year you stopped being relevant. I got the full 4 seconds the first time we met, at a restaurant in the Glebe where I picked up the check and she let me, and never said thank you, and ordered a second bottle of wine I was also buying. I told myself it didn't matter. He loved the girl. Ashley wasn't unkind to me back then, just distant, the way you're distant from the help. And I wanted my boy happy more than I wanted to be liked by people who summer in the Gatineaus. When they got engaged, Daniel came to my house and sat at my kitchen table and held my hands across it the way he used to when he was small, and he said, "Mom, the Hargroves want to do this big." Ashley's always dreamed of it. And we can't swing it, not the kind of thing they're picturing. And he looked at me with his father's eyes and my own stubborn chin, and I knew before he asked. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. What's money for if not this? $82,000. A barn venue out near Wakefield with the river behind it, 140 guests, a caterer who flew in oysters, a band from Montreal, a florist who used the word installation instead of flowers and charged accordingly. I didn't blink. I signed for it. Every deposit, every contract, every single one, and I want you to hold on to that because it matters later more than anything else in this story. I signed them all myself, in my own name, Margaret Ellison, because that's a habit 40 years of business burns into you. You never, ever sign a man's name to a debt you're going to pay. You hold the paper. The person who holds the paper holds the room. I didn't even think about it as a strategy back then. It was just who I am. It became a strategy later, when they made me one. The trouble started small, the way trouble does. It started with a dress. Ashley and Vivian went to pick the wedding dress at a salon in Westboro, and I found out because Daniel mentioned it offhand, weeks after, like it was nothing. Oh, that was a Hargrove thing, Mom. Mother-daughter, you get it. I didn't get it. I had paid the deposit on that dress. I had imagined sitting on a little velvet chair with a glass of something fizzy, watching some girl I was about to call family turn around in the mirror. Instead, I found out I'd bankrolled a memory I wasn't invited to. I let it go. God help me, I let it go. Then it was the menu tasting, which I learned about from an Instagram photo. Then, the venue walkthrough where the planner, a lovely, nervous woman named Renee, who I think felt the whole thing in her bones, texted me afterward. "So sorry you couldn't make it. I had never been told it was happening. I had paid Renee's invoice the week before." You start to feel it then. The way you're being slowly, politely walked to the back of your own house. Nobody slams a door. They just keep forgetting to tell you which room everyone's in. And every time you ask, they look at you like you're being difficult, like you're the one making it awkward, when all you did was want to stand in the room you were paying for. The seating chart was the hill I didn't know we were all climbing until I was already near the top of it. A seating chart, if you've never had to fight over one, is a map. It tells you who matters, who's near the couple, who's at the back by the kitchen doors where the staff come and go, and the cold air gets in every time. I'd catered 400 weddings in my life. I had read more seating charts than the wedding party ever would. I knew exactly what the back tables meant. I'd watched mothers cry over them in venue parking lots, and I'd always thought, quietly, not me, never me, not after everything. I got the chart in a group email Renee sent to coordinate the final head count. Table 1, right against the dance floor. The bride and groom, the Hargroves, Vivian, Gordon. Ashley's grandmother, her aunt, her uncle, a cousin from Toronto I'd met once. Me, I found at table 11, against the back wall, by the kitchen pass, the seat I would have given to a difficult coworker's +1. I sat with that for a day. I'm a calm woman. 40 years on a hot line teaches you to keep your face still while everything inside you is at a rolling boil. I didn't fire off a text. I drove out to Daniel's place in Barhaven that evening, the good kind of evening with the maples just turning, and I sat on his couch and I said, as gently as I have ever said anything, "Sweetheart, I think there's been a mistake with the seating. I'm at the back. And my son, my boy, the one I sewed Halloween costumes for at midnight, the one I taught to skate holding the back of his jacket." My son looked at his phone and not at me and said, "Mom, it's complicated." Ashley's side is really traditional about the head table. It's an immediate family thing on her end. Vivian feels strongly. It's not personal. It's not personal. He was $40,000 into a debt I was carrying, sitting in a house I'd helped with the down payment on. Telling me my seat at his wedding was not personal. I asked him, very quietly, "Daniel, who's paying for this wedding?" And he had the grace to look uncomfortable for exactly 1 second before Vivian's voice came out of my own son's mouth. "Mom, please don't make it about the money. That's exactly the kind of thing that makes this hard." That's the trick, you see. That's the whole machine. They take your money with one hand and shame you for mentioning it with the other. They want the gift. They just can't stand the giver. And they count on you loving them too much to ever set the gift down. I drove home that night and I didn't cry. I made a cup of tea and I let it go cold and I sat in my kitchen, the kitchen in my own paid-off house in Canada, and I thought about my mother who cleaned rooms at the Chateau Laurier for 30 years and was never once thanked by name. And I thought, I did not climb out of that to be put back in it by people who couldn't run a lemonade stand. But I'm not a cruel woman. I gave it one more try. I told myself maybe it was Vivian, maybe it was the weddings I stress, maybe my boy was just buckling under a family that outshouted him. So I said nothing more about the chart. I decided I'd be the bigger person. I'd sit at table 11 at my own son's wedding by the kitchen doors, and I'd smile because that's what mothers do. And then came the text, 11 days out. "You're welcome to come, Mom, but Ashley's family feels the head table should be immediate family only, her side. We saved you a nice spot near the back." He'd had to put it in writing. Vivian had finally made him spell it out, in words, on a screen, that the woman paying for the entire affair was a guest at it. A welcome guest, near the back. I read it 3 times. And somewhere in the third reading, the grief in me went still and quiet and turned into the one thing 40 years of business gives a woman that nobody ever expects. Clarity. I typed back, "Then I'll keep the money and you can keep the table." And then I called Marguerite Tremblay, who has been my lawyer since 1998, who I once paid in lasagna when cash was tight, who knows me the way only someone who's seen your bank statements at their worst can know you. It was nearly 9 at night. She picked up on the second ring. "Peg," she said. "What did they do?" "Not what's wrong. What did they do? That's a friend." I read her the text. There was a silence on the line, and then Marguerite said, in the flat, dangerous voice I've only heard her use a handful of times, "Whose name is on the contracts?" "Mine," I said. "Everyone. Everyone. Every single one. I never sign anybody else's name to my money." And Marguerite let out a long breath, and I swear I could hear her smiling. "Then this is the easiest call I'll make all year. Go to bed, Peg. I'll handle it in the morning." She didn't wait for morning. Here's the thing the Hargroves never understood, with all their plaques and their cottage and their 4-second looks. A wedding isn't a feeling. A wedding is a stack of contracts, and I was the customer on every one of them. Not Daniel, not Ashley, not Vivian, who had never paid for so much as a centerpiece. Me, Margaret Ellison, the lunch lady. The venue near Wakefield had a cancellation clause I had read 3 times before signing, the way I read everything. Full refund of the deposit if canceled by the contract holder more than 7 days out. We were 11 days out. Marguerite called them at 9 the next morning. The caterer, the same. The band's deposit was non-refundable, and I let them keep it. They're working people, and it wasn't their fault. The florist released me clean. Renee the planner, when Marguerite called, said only, "I understand completely, and I think there was relief in it." By noon the next day, the wedding near Wakefield with the river behind it did not exist. The barn was available again. The oysters were never ordered. The $82,000, minus a band deposit and a few honest fees, was on its way back to the account it came from. Daniel called at 1:15. I let it ring twice before I answered, and when I did, he was already crying. Mom, what did you do? The venue called Ashley. They said the contract holder canceled. Vivian is, "Mom, what did you do?" And I sat down at my kitchen table, and I kept my voice as steady as I keep it when a walk-in cooler dies in the middle of a lunch rush. And I said, "I kept my money, sweetheart. Just like I told you I would." He said I'd ruined everything. He said Ashley was devastated. He said Vivian was, and here he stopped, because even he could hear how it sounded. Vivian is humiliated. Vivian, I said, spent 8 months humiliating me, and she didn't spend $1 doing it. I spent $82,000, and I'll be damned if I'll pay for the privilege of being walked to the back of the room. You want a wedding, Daniel? You and Ashley are both grown adults with good jobs. Plan one you can afford. I'll come. I'll sit wherever you put me, because I'll be a guest and not a bank. But I will never again pay for a seat near the kitchen. And then I did the hardest thing I have ever done as a mother. Harder than the night shifts. Harder than the math at the grocery till. Harder than watching his father drive off. I said, "I love you. Call me when you remember who I am," and I hung up the phone, and I let him sit with the silence I'd been sitting in for 8 months. The Hargroves, I heard later, were apoplectic. Vivian apparently told people I had sabotaged the wedding, as though I had snuck into the barn with a crowbar instead of simply declining to keep paying. Gordon, the father, who I don't think had spoken 40 words to me total, called my office and left a message with my assistant demanding I fix this immediately. I had her tell him, in those words, that Ellison Food Group's catering division would be happy to provide a quote for any future event, and that all deposits were non-refundable. For 9 days, I heard nothing from my son. They were the longest 9 days I've spent since the year the urn broke, and I made coffee in a stock pot. I won't pretend I was fine. I'm a mother. I sat by the phone like a teenager, but I didn't call. Some lessons can only be learned in the quiet, and I'd been doing his talking for him his whole life. On the 10th day, he came to my door. No text first, just his car in my driveway, and him on my step with his eyes red and his shoulders down, looking about 9 years old again. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table, and for a long time he didn't say anything. Then he told me the whole thing had cracked open the moment the wedding fell apart. That with no grand barn and no oysters and no $80,000 to argue over, Ashley's family had shown him exactly what they thought of him, which was not much, and exactly what they'd thought of me, which was less than nothing. That Vivian had said, in front of him, "Well, what did you expect from people like that?" And that, for the first time, he'd heard it the way I'd been hearing it for a year. People like that. His own mother. The hands that had skated him around Brewer Park. He said Ashley had defended her mother. He said he'd looked at the woman he was about to marry and seen, plain as anything, that she would always seat me at table 11. Every Christmas, every birthday, every year for the rest of my life, and call it not personal. He didn't marry her. I want to be honest and tell you it wasn't because of the money or the wedding, not really. The wedding was just the thing that finally made the picture clear. The money pulled back the curtain, and behind it was a family that wanted my son for what he could become around them, and wanted his mother nowhere at all. He'd needed to see that. I'm sorry it cost him the girl he loved. I'm not sorry it cost me $82,000 to show it to him, because that turned out to be the cheapest thing I ever bought. He's 38 now, and he comes for supper most Sundays. He's seeing someone new, a nurse named Joelle, who works palliative care at the General, who calls me Peg and asks about my hands and once spent an entire Sunday afternoon learning to make my tourtière because she wanted to, not because anyone made her. The first time she met me, she said, "Daniel says you started with one deep fryer." That's the most badass thing I've ever heard. I knew right then, if they ever get married, I'll pay for it again. Gladly. With these same burned, clicking, honest hands, because the money was never the problem. The money was always a gift. It only became a weapon when they tried to split the gift from the giver, when they wanted the $82,000, but not the woman who earned it one breakfast at a time. I ran into Vivian Hargrove once, months later, at the Farm Boy on Robertson Road. She was holding a basket of fancy crackers, and she saw me, and for a second, the old 4-second look started to come across her face. The shoes, the purse, The year I stopped mattering. And then I watched her remember how it had all gone. Who'd held the contracts? Whose son had walked away? She gave me a tight little nod, the kind you give a stranger, and she looked away first. I didn't gloat. There's no satisfaction in it, in the end. Vivian is a frightened woman guarding a name with nothing behind it but a cottage she can't afford to heat. That's a colder life than mine ever was for all her plaques. I've got 110 people who count on me, a son who finally came home, and a company built by two ruined, beautiful hands. I nodded back, and I went and bought my own crackers, and I drove home to start the sauce, because Daniel and Joelle were coming Sunday. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. Canceling my only son's wedding 11 days out. Such a drastic thing, they say. Couldn't you have just talked it through? I talked it through for 8 months. Talking is what they're counting on. Talking is how they keep you at table 11. They'll let you talk forever, as long as you keep paying and never once act. I don't regret a single thing. Not the text. Not the call to Marguerite at 9 at night. Not the years of signing every contract in my own name. A habit I never knew I'd need until the morning I needed it more than anything. Because the lesson my son learned that November about who he was and where he came from, and what a woman with self-respect actually does when she's quietly shown the back of the room, that lesson was worth more than any wedding. You can't buy it. You can only show it. And I showed it with the only things I've ever had to teach with. Not a name, not old money, just 2 hard hands, a stack of contracts in my own name, and the smallest, strongest word there is: no. If I could hand you one thing out of all of it, it would be this: your generosity is a gift, not a tax. The day someone wants what your hands can give, but turns their face from the woman attached to them. The day they'll take the $82,000 but not the seat beside you. That's the day your kindness has been turned into a leash. Set it down. Love your people with everything you've got. Give until it feels good in your chest. But never, not once, pay for the privilege of being treated as less than you are. Keep your dignity and your generosity in the same 2 hands. They cost you exactly the same to earn. Don't ever let anyone make you spend one to keep the other. That's my story. 1 text, 1 phone call, and $82,000 that came home. And a son who came home right behind it.